Welcome to Clinical Data Talks, a podcast brought to you by CRS Cube. I'm your host, Sylvain Berthelot. Join me and industry experts as we discuss the latest trends impacting the world of clinical data. A lot of you will know my guest today for his sharp observations of our industry. He started as a software developer and has since contributed to the success of a lot of eClinical vendors. He's one of my favorite LinkedIn voices, and he's also known for wearing a kilt from time to time. It's no one else but Doug Bain. Hi, Doug. How are you doing?
Thank you, Sylvain. I have to disappoint you. I'm not wearing a kilt, but I'm not even going to demonstrate. You can get the top half. But very glad to be on this podcast, so thank you for the invite.
Well, thank you for joining me. Today we're talking about the clinical data lifecycle, and I can't think of anyone better to discuss that with, so that's great. And when you came to me with this topic, I thought, yes, that's a great topic for the podcast. And then I thought, oh, wait, what does he mean by that? So first question, could you explain to our audience what you mean by the clinical data lifecycle?
I mean, I think it's something that I have sort of considered really going right way back to when I first got involved in clinical research, and I won't even share how far back that is. But the life cycle of clinical trial data is the steps that data needs to go to from when it's originally identified, wherever its source might be, all the way through to the other end where it's then used as part of an analysis to go into a clinical study report. Okay. So that life cycle can involve edit checking, it could be source data verification, it could be even transposing it for an EHR. Basically, it's going through a number of steps before you can say, yep, it's all there. And I'm interested in it because I believe there are significant breakpoints or lag points that when combined slow the whole process down. And I've been considering where are these break or lag points and what can we do to try to compress them so that you can make decisions early. You may not need to make decisions early for different reasons, but I'd like to enable the choice of being able to make these decisions not based on the fact that data is sitting somewhere in a silo for a month or 2 months or more.
And when you talk about decisions, you mean decisions on the clinical trial? Is that
right? Principally, but I think you could also apply the same principles to some trial management, clinical operations. If you're trying to manage the trial, make decisions in a trial related to things like recruitment or such things, the fact you've got to wait 5 weeks to get a true picture of, for example, data that might come from a monitoring report, that seems like 5 weeks that you could be doing something, right? Why do we need to wait 5 weeks? So certainly the clinical data, I think the ability to be able to make decisions, and I think also, the power of these decisions are dependent on the cleanliness of the data. If you can, in principle, look at data, as soon as it's saved into an EDC product, in principle, you could look at that data for certain purposes. But the power you get from looking at that data is going to be lessened because it's maybe not been edit checked or submitted or STV'd or whatever. So the power should increase. And I think, I'm sure we'll talk about AI in this podcast more than once, but let me start. The power of the ability for AI to make, decisions with an appropriate level of confidence is dependent on some of these factors, knowing the level of cleanliness of that data and go, right, I can confidently say that you can make that, trial adaptation or something like that at this point in time. If you don't have that meta information or that state of data as early as possible, you've got lag. You eventually don't need.
Yes, and I'm sure that's something study teams really want. That would release pressure on data management as well, I can imagine. So at your end, in your experience, well, first of all, do you have experience setting up like eClinical ecosystems? And how did that support trial and data management teams?
I have, and this is something that I've had more experience in the last 5 years working at a CRO. Prior to that, I was far more focused on how can we create the best software, either trial management or EDC most typically, or like more of a DCT platform as well. So I've been focused on that, but in the CRO world, you're saying, right, we need to create an environment for running this clinical trial, right? And that environment should be as solid and as reliable as you can do. At a CRO, you don't want to be adding risk into the possibility of your clean execution of that trial. So you don't want to throw risky software or risky in situations and so on. So I have been responsible for defining the map of systems that are applicable, and to ensure that that map is as connected as possible. And when I say connected, I mean you've got your EDC system speaking to your CTMS system, or your CTMS speaking to, et cetera, et cetera. And I feel very strongly, I've blogged about this in the past, and the level of connectivity you achieve with your clinical research platform. I call it platform, but what I'm saying when I call it platform, I'm not necessarily saying one piece of software. I do like single instance software, but you might be saying a number of pieces to that puzzle, but make sure they're connected. And it's not just connected from a technical perspective, it's also connected from the people and the process perspective. I've seen many times where you have a stack of SOPs by department, and their stack is very much geared towards, this is what my department does, and they don't have a strong connectivity and reflection of activities of other departments, which to me, going back to my earlier point, is putting lag into the flow, because you're actually saying, I'm not going to look at that data until this big marker has occurred, which could add lag, which maybe isn't required.
Yeah. So is it something that, in your experience or with what you've done, teams are open to, like breaking silos?
To be honest, not often, I'm afraid. Because I think, there is a benefit in defining silos. If you are an organization and you want to be able to scale up an organization, it's easier to scale it up by silo in some regards. I think there's alternative methods. I'm a big fan of Agile. I come from a software world, and Agile, it's actually maybe not a great word. I remember saying the word Agile to an SCDM meeting last year, and someone gave me a very stony face. I'm going, okay, that's not a good word to use. But my feeling is that you can pull together a team from a resource pool, and you can say, right, guys, we're working on this study, okay? And try to spin round this problem of either the definition of the study, or the building of the study, or the execution of the study, but spin through these cycles far faster than if you were to do it with a gate process where somebody finishes, a department or a function finishes what they're doing, and then passes that over to the next function. They do their stuff and pass the next thing. I think that slows things down, and it also doesn't lend itself towards an iteration of, hold on a minute, that's not quite right. Maybe we should change that, okay? So in the software world, we've sort of learned, if you want to get to the best product, you should rapidly iterate through this, because you can see it, you're in the moment, you're working on it. And if you don't, your focus isn't on it. You're maybe getting a document, like for example, protocol. You could send a protocol off to data management. They're looking through it. Yeah, looks okay to me. To me, the engagement is not what it needs to be when you're reviewing a protocol. It can be very hard. But gather around a sort of meeting room or virtual meeting room where you're sort of walking through it, working with it. To me, you're focused, you're engaged, you're involved in it, and I think that creates better output.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've worked with a cross-functional team at one of the top pharmas. I was on the vendor side, but their structure was very well set in a way because it was a true cross-functional team. But I could tell that they all had their own priorities. And although the team worked very well together, I'm not sure they achieved what they wanted to because of those diverse priorities. But everyone is interested in clinical data and has one objective, which is linked to clinical data. So I think it's a right approach to focus on clinical data to bring a cross-functional team together.
Yeah, I mean, I see where you're coming from, and I can understand that. You know, if you're, let's say you're in biostats, you're invited to this meeting, right? There could be a tendency for you to defend your biostats position, right?
Yeah.
I'm fighting for biostats because these guys in data management or wherever, they'll be pushing it off this way. And that, I think you need to work on the culture of this, where it's almost like you need to have a leader. And a leader is not in biostats, they're not in project management. You need to say, no, this is the clinical trial leader, right?
Yeah.
And they're helping to coordinate this team, which is one team work. And by the way, I'm a big fan of this team, including the sponsor or including the CRO. To me, they're all around one table. They've all got role to play. Yeah. There's no us and them, all around one table, and they're all working to be constructive. So I think there's a cultural change, but you do need to maybe look at the organization structure and say, actually, there's a clinical trial leader almost sits above, these departments.
Yeah.
They are empowered to say, right, we can make decisions. I mean, I think you see that more in the biotech world, where you get smaller clients. They're looking for agile, study delivery, and they want to brainstorm. They want to, create the best solution, and they don't want to be told, no, this is the way we do it. And sorry, you need to just accept it. This is the way we work. They're looking for a more agile team to be able to say, yeah, we can do this.
Yeah, and sometimes you see solutions that don't solve any problem.
Yeah, I think there's almost like you've got all the technology, and then you validate the technology, implement it, and you go, right, that's good. I did actually a analysis. KCR, I thought, I'm going to sit down with some of the guys and see, what are you doing? Actually, can I see what you're doing day to day, right? Because I want to check. I really want to understand. And this is a few years ago now, but I used this as an exercise to validate that the systems we were using were functioning, were operating the way we expected and wanted them to work.
Yeah.
And I sat down with a CRA. And she said, right, and this is my Word document, and I open this Word document and I fill this Word document out. And I said, oh, hold on, I said, stop. Why are you filling it out? She said, well, we're using, I won't say which system it was, but we're using an EDC system, and the sponsor wants us to use this EDC system, but it's not been set up in a particular way, so I can't use it for data review because that wasn't enabled. And therefore, what I do is I copy paste the data into my Word document. I review it here, and I interchange Q&A with the site that way.
Yeah.
And I'm going, did anyone not speak to you about this? And go, could we not go back to the sponsor and say, maybe you could switch on that data review flag, and maybe we wouldn't need that. No, we've got no control over that. So that, I mean, it's a small example, but there's many, many other cases. That was Word document, but there's also Excel. Excel is used everywhere. A lot of the CIOs, CTOs, they don't even want to look. They don't want to lift the cover and see where it's been used. But it's been used far too extensively, and I don't blame the users in any way. They're solving the problems that they have. And they've picked Excel, the tools that they can work with to solve these problems, right? And I think as technologists, we need to say, well, hold on a minute. If our EDC tool is not solving that problem, we need to fix the EDC tool or configure it so it does fix things.
Yeah, it's interesting. I love doing that, actually. like talking to users. I used to do it in previous roles, and then help shape the product. I think that's the most exciting things of technology development. But then on, like, when you think about the person who's using Excel, for example, they might be thinking, oh yeah, but like, first of all, who do I talk to? And then how long is it going to take? I was listening to an audiobook this morning about, it's something in marketing, but which, like a concept that I really like doing tests, trying to do your development lifecycle so short that it becomes very easy to test a new functionality or test a solution to a problem. And I think sometimes when I think about our industry, I feel like we're not challenging our timelines enough. I'm not talking about clinical trial development, but like the other day, it was at Scope actually. I heard someone talking about the regulations. I can't remember which one they were talking about, but their comment was, "Oh, this will need to evolve because it's not optimal. But I know it's going to take 10 years to evolve, so we're going to have to live with it." And I was shocked. I thought, well, if the next iteration is 10 years down the line, then that's not evolution. It's just very, very slow progress.
But I would agree. It is very slow, and I think the regulators, they've got a challenging job to fulfill. They need to reflect current thinking, but you've almost got a chicken and egg situation. The vendors are going, no, we can't do that because that doesn't meet the current regulations. So they try to push the boundary, but it's very difficult, right?
Yeah.
So we've seen, to me, an example of that is the interpretation of e-source. I think some of the boundaries need to be pushed harder. I was doing electronic source clinical trials directly into an EDC system in 2001, 2002, right? And yet, 20 plus years later, people are still telling me you can't do that, right?
Yeah.
And that worked. To me, that was working really well. In that case, it was a phase 1 study. We did 49 studies in that phase 1 setting. And we wanted to capture data at source, but there was a perception that, oh no, you'd had to keep that data at the site. And there's still the perception of the fact that that data has to be at the site or under the control of the investigator or the site in a separate database, right? But I just completely disagree with that one. The software, technologies are creating these crazy separation systems. You've got one database for the investigator and a separate database sitting on the same server or hardware to keep it separate. This is what happened. A number of vendors are doing that, and they're saying, no, we need to keep it separate so they've got control. It makes no sense, because effectively you're just using bits and bytes to set permissions to gain access, whether it's in the same physical database or in two separate databases. It's the same, mechanism that achieves it. And because of the separation, that's a lag. We're creating this artificial lag of having data in one database and having to move it across to another database. It's not needed. You absolutely don't need it. But the regulators, I've seen even back at SCDM, regulators up on the stage were saying, no, that's the way it's got to be. It's got to be under control. So I think it's not. I'm not going to point the finger at the regulators. I think it's also the vendors need to push the boundary and have a mechanism to communicate and voice their challenges to that. And for the regulators, they need to be listening to some of the new vendors that maybe haven't got a vested interest in keeping things the same way they are. And be able to tell what's new and thought-worthy and worth pursuing, as opposed to maybe what's old and just that's the way we've always done it, or that's the way the systems currently work. They need to be able to see what you can do going forward.
Yeah, I agree. So going back to, because we've went on a tangent a bit, which was very good, but going back to like the life cycle of clinical data, what would you like to see evolve in our industry?
So I think we have a problem today in the way in which data is pulled together and then cleaned. Okay, and the best way to maybe describe it is one specific example. So let's imagine data is captured into EDC, a traditional EDC. I won't point fingers at any one particular system, but it's captured into EDC, and that EDC, let's presume it's got edit checking, so check the quality of the data using a rule and edit check. And then maybe it will have some mechanism for doing source data verification, then you can lock it, right?
Yeah.
And many of the systems work along the same basis, that you can only lock it once you maybe completed, closed your queries or done your source data verification.
Yeah.
Now, some of the problems we see is that the fact that the data representation tools within EDC are not sufficient, and therefore you take the data outside, you put it into some other tool. But what that then has the effect of doing is saying, actually, I can't press lock, because I don't know if I can press that lock button on that data point or that page or that patient or that site, because data is being reviewed externally.
Yeah.
So it's been removed, right? And that's just a sort of tiny example, but it's pretty fundamental. If you're using a system that's designed to help you understand, right, this study's ready, if data's been worked on or processed outside in a separate tool or separate database, the possibility to do that is gone, right? It's broken. So you're going to have to say, actually, I'm going to revert back. What I'm going to do is I'm going to capture this. I'm going to extract it into an Excel spreadsheet. That'll do it. And then I'll use formulas to work out whether it's already, right? That is what happens in most clinical trials today, in my view, right?
Okay.
I don't have evidence, but I suspect, looking at how the tools work, that's what's most often being done, right? So I don't like the fact that data has to be taken out, given to something else, because the original tool is not fulfilling the function that's required. And I don't fully believe that it cannot. I think it just isn't, right? And it's not recognized that it isn't. And there's vendors out there saying, look, let me fix this, I will fix that over here because you guys can't do it, right? Which is fine. We're cobbling our way to a solution, but it's almost, the EDC system's got about 80% of the way there, or 90% of the way there, but the last 10% it can't do, which almost breaks the first 80%, because you can't actually use the full life cycle anymore. So that right now is a bugbear, because it gets you back to what I said originally, this lag. It creates a lag, and it's lag for all the data, because you're going, if these data points are wrong, can I use that patient? So therefore the whole patient's bad. The whole patient is not in a questionable state. And therefore you got to wait for all this to be cleaned. So I think there's better work, more logical. I think it's more real world work. When you lift the cupboard and see an Excel spreadsheet used for data view, the developers, the systems, vendors should sit down and go, why is that? What do we need to do to take away the need that user genuinely has to use an Excel spreadsheet to do their job?
Well, it's going back to talking to the users. It's interesting how I think I can see a lot of reproduction of what's been done already without too much thinking, and something I'd like to see evolve at my end is, instead of saying, okay, an EDC, for example, does this, and that's all the EDC does, going back to or changing what we think of an EDC, because since we created the EDC concept, in the industry, things have evolved. And like you mentioned, sites having more control of their data. We see sites starting to select their own technology, or maybe there's better technology that would serve sites better in terms of collecting data. And then the sponsor needs to see that data, but they don't need necessarily an EDC. I think at the moment we're stuck in, the sponsor selects everything, so let's not change it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I feel for the sites. I think the sites are really hard done by. You know, this is discussions I've had and Brad Hightower has raised. I think it's been very useful to have that dialogue, and we have to keep having that dialogue. You know, the principle of, you know, an investigator site that's got 10 clinical trials they're running, and they have the potential of 50 different systems. You know, it might not be 50, but let's say it's 40 different systems. If you're a clinical research coordinator sitting down in front of your computer at 9 o'clock in the morning, what the hell do you do? You know, which of these 40 systems do you go to, right? And, you know, many people would say, oh, if we just solve the problem of single sign-on, everything's going to be great. No, you're still going to have to go to 40 systems. Yeah, you might skip the username and password problem, but you've still got to decide which of these 40 systems have got the most important query or the important signature to be applied. So you're going to start at 9 o'clock. You're going to work till 11 till you find the 37th system that's gone. God. And to me, that's just crazy. We've got to solve that problem. So what the sites are doing, and you can't blame the sites in any way. You know, Dr. Fox, he's a strong advocate on LinkedIn of, you know, sites owning their own technology. But in my mind, that's just, you know, growing to the problem. That's, yes, it might make things easier for the site, but it's making the overall map of technology and data that bit more complex. So the whole solution, if you take one clinical trial with all the sites, all the stakeholders, if you add on additional site technology in that sort of form, where instead of having, you know, one EDC system, effectively you could add the number of EDC systems that you have as number of sites to the whole mix, it could be a complete car crash. But I don't blame the sites. They're going, this is unworkable. We need a solution. If the sponsors aren't going to fix it for us, the vendors aren't, we're going to take things into our own hand and we're going to fix them ourselves.
Well, I'm sure we could talk about this a lot longer, but that's all we've got time for today. Unfortunately, I've got one last question for you. What's the best piece of advice you've received that you apply to work?
I've been thinking about this. I've got two, actually. Never argue with an idiot.
Okay.
And actually, let me just get the exact quote, because it was Mark Twain. Never argue with an idiot. They'll drag you down to their level and beat you with experience, right? But I won't pick on that one. My favorite one was with the first software developer I worked with. It was more, the advice was you should spend 50% of your time designing your software and 50% developing it. Now, design today is maybe different. In the old days, you know, design would be different. But now, to go back to your example, you can actually use products like Figma to effectively interactively design a user experience with the user in front of you. So you're not actually writing the software, you're actually writing the design interactively with the end user and get them to grasp it and go, yes or no, that won't work. And you change it and you change it. To me, that's a design process. And to me, that should be 50% of your time. You know, so the product management, the software design process is changing significantly because you get these super duper tools that will actually create what is a mock product to make it look like it's a real product. And you take the user all the way through the life cycle. So you're bridging that gap that we traditionally had. Is you go all the way through software design, write it, deploy it. You know, a year later, they'd come back and say, oh, it's not going to work. And you go, oh, back to the drawing board. But now we've got rapid iteration, wireframe tools, and I use Figma, but there's other tools out there that allow you to do that. So that is design. Spend your 50% on the design, and then you won't waste your software development time producing something and the lag producing something that actually not solving the problems.
Yeah, and it goes back to what you were saying about working with users as well.
Yeah,
and speed of development. Great piece of advice. Thank you, Doug. It's been nice talking to you as always. And I'll interact with you on LinkedIn, I'm sure about that. And I'll see you soon as well. And thank you everyone who's been listening to us today. You can find more clinical data talks on our website.